Hello all, welcome back. So there's a question which is pretty interesting, and this is a pretty old question. I took some time to do my research, talk to multiple people so that I don't at least share a half-baked or a incorrect information about it. So somebody have asked this question around to understand how the infrastructure of Business Central Online looks like, as in how many environments can I have, how many production can I have, what is the tenant, when I get assigned a tenant from Microsoft, and things like that. So in this video, we'll try to understand it with a slide deck. So if you know all about this, you can skip the video. But if you are interested in understanding the infrastructure of Business Center Online, be with me, and we'll try to explain you as soon as as easy as it is. So that's about the intro. Welcome all. Let's start. So the first thing that we need to understand when you are trying to understand from the Business Central perspective, online perspective, is what is Azure Active Directory. Because that plays a key role in how you will set up your environment and what kind of environment you'll have. And we'll see the, the common examples that are available on Microsoft website and whatever I was able to understand by talking to different administrators. If you find something wrong somewhere, please add a comment and I'll make sure that I'll do some correction video if I'm going wrong somewhere. So first thing, why we needed an Azure Active Directory and what it is. So without an Azure Active Directory, if this is an employee who's working on an organization and he or she would like to utilize a service that's available in their environment, let's take an example of SQL service or SQL database. The administrator will assign the user a username and password, and that user using that username and password will access that service. But let's assume that resource also need access to Microsoft Office. Then he is assigned a different username and password to access that. In the same way, as many services as that user would like to utilize, he or she will get multiple username and password for all these different services that he or she is utilizing. To make it simple, that's where your Azure Active Directory comes into a picture, where you get one single username and password to access all the services that are hosted for you as an employee. As on the other hand side, it makes easier for administrator to just assign you rights to those services if you are authorized for that, and you can utilize them with single username and password rather than remembering all these username and passwords for different services. Now, let's understand how this Azure Active Directory plays a key role when we talk about Business Central Online. So let's first understand what you mean by a single Azure AD or a multiple Azure AD, because that will be a key factor defining how your infrastructure will look like in Business Central Online. So let's take an example of a first single Azure AD. You have a Azure AD tenant, and let's say all your users that are there have their user IDs as username at the demo.com, and the demo.com is your Azure AD. As soon as you subscribe or you start utilizing the Azure AD, you get assigned a tenant. So either as a company, you started using Azure Blob Storage, or your uh, things have been shifted to cloud. And I'm not talking about Business Central in general. Even if you are on Business Central on premise, or even if you're on Dynamics Nav on premise, but you're subscribing to any of the Microsoft services on Azure, at that time you get assigned a ID, a unique ID for your tenant, and that becomes your tenant ID. And this will be important as we go forward. That's one example that a company decide that all their users, irrespective of where they are geographically, they all will have the email ID assigned as username at the rate demo.com. But then you also would have seen some organization where they have multiple Azure ADs, maybe based on regions, maybe based on different other business requirement, which I'm not an expert on. But just to take an example, which is pretty realistic, that you would have seen that some users are tagged as user one at the demo company dot India, some are tagged as demo.us, and some are tagged as demo.de. Based on their different Azure IDs, these different users in different geographical location, in this case, will have access to different resources. So in this scenario, this user can only access resources which are hosted on demo.de, and same here and same here. But in this scenario where you as an organization decide that you have one single Azure AD tenant, then all the users, irrespective of where they are placed or whatever your geographical separation is, you all access the same services which are available. Now, this plays a key role when you start thinking about Business Central. You can either be on this model or you can either be on this model where you have regional Azure ADs. Now, let's understand how it plays a key role in the Business Central world. So, first, let's take the example of when you have one single Azure tenant or Azure AD throughout the organization, irrespective of the location where you are. What do you get? You get an Azure AD tenant. And then what you do is you subscribe to the Business Central services. Now, as soon as you subscribe to Business Central services, what you get is one production and three sandbox environments, which is something like this: a production environment and then three sandboxes that you can create. They can max out to be three. That's the when you subscribe to the Business Central service. And these environments, if you are coming from Dynamics Nav or on-premise world, think of them as a database. So these all four are tagged as environments in Business Central. Inside each of these environments, you can have one or multiple company based on what these environments are. So think that in production, you might have three companies which are doing three different businesses. In Sandbox, because you are doing some testing or training, you might have only two or one company as you need. But if you would like to relate environment to on-premise environment, that will be equivalent to a database. So all these are four different databases where one is tagged as production database and other three are sandbox database. And then inside these databases, as it happens on-prem, you can have multiple or one or multiple companies based on it. But now remember that you have one as your AD tenant. So all your users or all your employees who are in different regions in the world will have access to all these environments. And they all will be able to work synchronously in these different environments. This is not the topic of this discussion, but you can limit user access based on environment in Business Central SaaS, which we may talk in different video about it. But this makes it easier that all the resources have access to all these environments that are available on your single Azure AD tenant. And that's where when you access these environment, this tenant ID becomes your unique ID. Again, you already might have a tenant ID if you are using any Microsoft Azure services. You don't get a tenant ID when you buy Business Central, and you may if you are not using that uh, Azure services before buying Business Central online. But now let's see the other side of the fence where you have multiple Azure tenant. What happens in that case? In that case, you have a demo.de as your tenant, and then inside that you have some environments, production, three sandboxes, which is the max capacity. This is just for the demo purpose. You might have only one sandbox, you may have two sandboxes, and so on and so forth. And then inside each environment, there are multiple or single companies. In the same way, you have another Azure tenant, which is demo.us, which again have the similar configuration and same for India Azure AD, and you have certain access environments inside that and companies inside that. But remember one thing, that in this case, what will happen that this user who is defined in this Azure AD will only have access to these environments. This user will not be able to access these environments until unless you create this user separately on these environments or Azure AD environments. In the same way, this user will only have access to this. He or she cannot access these. And same way for India, these users can only access whatever is hosted on Business Central in their Azure AD. Now that's a business decision how you would like to do it, but that's how it different when you are in one Azure AD or multiple Azure ADs. And that kind of bifurcates how you do things. So for me, it looks a little bit complex that there are certain users in certain part or certain regions in the world which will not be able to access other environments. But then there are other questions that if I only have the previous infrastructure and I would like to have multiple production environment, how I do it. So let's get into it. So first, let's understand the default quota that you get when you buy Business Central. Let's say on a single tenant mode. When you buy Business Central online, what Microsoft provides you is a storage capacity of 80 GB across all the environments that you have. And when I'm saying environment, that means database, where you can have one production and three sandboxes. So as soon as you purchase Business Central, you get 80 GB of database limit for all the databases or environments that you have, where you can bifurcate your environment with one production and three sandboxes environment. This is the fixed limit of 80 GB, but then there is some additional storage that you get based on what type of users you have and how many users you have. So if you are purchasing Business Central Premium, then you get 3 GB additional storage space per user. So just to keep it simple, if you have 10 users of type premium, then you get additional 30 GB and so on and so forth. So in the same way, if you purchase essential, then you get 2 GB per user. And if you purchase device, then you get 1 GB per user additional storage on top of 80 GB. So you can do your maths how many premium users you have if you have premium, because you can't mix and match some premium and some essentials. You'll either have all premium users or all essential users, just to keep it simple. So based on how many users you have, you can do the maths and then add that into the 80 GB, which is shared across all the environments, not just for one environment. For all these max 4 environment, you can have a storage space of 80 plus, do your maths, user licenses thing. What else? If you would like to purchase, you can buy additional space if you need it, either per GB wise, or I guess if I'm not wrong, there is a uh, another option to buy it per 100 GB based on how big your database may go. So that's also possible. But how should I extend my default quota? Because this is good if I have one single environment. But if for uh, regions specific issues or limitations, I would like to have separate databases, separate production environment per region. Then how do I do it? Because this is what I get. So how can I extend this? So let's talk about what you can extend on the default tenant that you get or default business central tenant environment that you get. What you can do is you by default get this, and let's assume the production that I got by default, I utilize that production for my US company. And then I got 3 sandboxes. But I can't run my business on Sandbox because that's on a separate Azure server in the Microsoft data center, which does not have that high speed like production environment or production server have. So what you can do, you can purchase additional production environment. So anytime you purchase one production environment from Microsoft, you get 3 sandbox environment with it. On top of it, you also get only 4 GB of additional capacity. So if I have 80 GB of a space by default, where I get one production and 3 sandboxes, I can still purchase more production environment And for each production environment, I'll get three sandboxes, additional sandboxes, and I'll also get 4 GB on additional capacity on my for all the environment. So taking the same example where I was split it into three different regions based on my company's requirement, I can actually buy two additional production for DE and India. The total environment that I have then are three production because I have purchased two additional production and I already had one production. And I get nine sandboxes, three with this and six with the additional two production that I purchased. So at this point, I'll have three production environment and I'll have nine sandbox environment. What is the default capacity that I get? I get 80 GB by default with this, plus I get 4 GBs for these two production. So in total, the default capacity that I get is 88 GB of space. Then again, taking example of that you have 10 users, just to pick a random number. If you have 10 premium users, then you get additional 30 GB. If you have 10 essential users, then you get additional 20 GB. If you have 10 device users, then you get 10 additional GBs. So eventually, you can do your maths based on how many users you have, how many environments you will purchase, and how many additional GBs you get. So with this, what will happen is when you look at your admin center in Business Central SaaS, that will look like something like this. You will have a US production and then three US sandboxes if you want, and they will be targeting the country region US. And in the same way, you will have an India production and you can have three sandboxes for India. And it's not mandatory that you create all these three for India. You can either create for US, Denmark, or for any other country for testing purposes. In the same way, you get one production for DE, and then you can also create three more sandbox environment. Now I'm pretty sure some people here while watching this are saying, "Oh, tell us the price." I'm surely not the right person to ask that question. I would surely suggest reach out to your CSP who can answer the question around pricing of these additional production environment and the cost of additional space if you have to purchase from Microsoft based on your business needs. With that being said, there's the benefit of using this approach is that you have all your users have access to all these environments, and as I said, you can also limit it, as I was hinting in the earlier slide, using this feature in your Business Central SaaS called security group, where you can still limit that, oh, these users from, let's say, US will not have access to India, just to give you an example of it. So you can even set that. The beauty of it is that you can limit the users who can access different environments, but also you will have an ability to people working on different environments based on your intercompany processes or any other process that will require that. And you will have one single area. There's one other thing which is not being discussed in this is where your database or environments will be placed, because there is a area in your business central where you can define or where it is listed that where your environment will be placed based on the nearest location of Microsoft data center. If I'm not wrong and if I have read it correctly, the Azure region of your environment can be changed by requesting it to Microsoft so that it's near to the users who are accessing it more frequently. So for example, if I, the first environment when I purchased Business Central, I purchased it somewhere in US, let's say in central US. So by default, all these new environments that I'm creating will automatically, these environments will be placed in central US data center of Microsoft. But you can always request Microsoft to change locations of these environments in Azure, and Microsoft will do it based on a support request. So that's also possible, and you should surely do it if it helps you in your regional, you know, regulations or for any other request in the business. But I I think that will clear some of the doubts that people had around how, where, how many productions I can create, how many sandboxes I can create. Can I have more than one production environment? I hope that clarifies that doubt, that you can have multiple production. You will have to just purchase them. Anytime you purchase a production environment, you get 3 additional sandbox for free, and you get 4 GB of extra storage capacity. Plus, based on your user license type, you get different additional space or storage capacity, uh, which depends on what kind of users you have. You can limit your users to access to environment using the security group feature in Business Central SaaS, and you can also move your database to a different data center based on your company requirement. So now think about, do you have a tenant ID? You already have a tenant ID. If you're using any Microsoft services, go ahead and see in every service, you'll see that there's a tenant ID, which is common across all the services that you utilize. When you are Business Central as a service get attached to that tenant and you start utilizing it. So to summarize what we learned, if you are using any Microsoft service as your services, you already have a tenant ID assigned. When you purchase Business Central, you get 80 GB of default space and you get 1 production and 3 sandbox environments. You can still purchase additional production environment, and which each additional production environment you get 3 additional sandboxes and you get a 4 GB additional capacity of databases. If the database size is becoming a problem, you can still purchase additional storage space from Microsoft. And if I'm not wrong, there are these 2 SKUs of 1 GB or 100 GB. I'm sure there might be some other which I'm not aware about. If access to different environment becomes a problem where you would like to limit some user, you can do it using the security group feature in Business Central SaaS. So hope whosoever asked that question got his answer, and I was able to explain everything correctly. If I went wrong somewhere, please let me know. I would like to correct that if I made some mistake. In the pinned comment, I'll add references of all the articles that I read for preparation of this video, and hope that makes sense. See you next day with the next video and a next question from the community. Thank you. Have a great day. This is Saurav Dhyani signing out.